They do not carve statues for the Inquisitors who fail. There are no vaulted halls bearing their names, no illuminated scrolls marking their last defiance. When an Inquisitor is judged unworthy, whether through weakness, hesitation, or the simple cruelty of chance, the Imperium does not mourn them. It erases them. Their sigil is struck from the archives, their deeds are unmade in parchment and data alike, and whatever loyal men and women once spoke their name learn to speak as though they never lived. The galaxy does not remember failures. It devours them, yet the truth is never perfectly buried. There are echoes, sealed edicts, redacted reports, execution logs missing dates and seals, and the rare surviving witness who wakes screaming in the dark. From these fragments, a shape emerges, not martyrdom, not redemption, but something slower and more pitiless. A fall without audience, a judgment without appeal. In a civilization built upon fear and enforced belief, the fate of a failed Inquisitor is not merely death. It is annihilation of identity, loyalty, and soul, enacted by the same hand that once called them chosen. There is no cruelty in the galaxy like the cruelty the Imperium reserves for those it once trusted most. The first tremor is always invisible, subtle as the shift of sand underfoot. Inquisitor Darien Kale felt it in the unsteadiness of his own pulse, the sudden awareness that a question he had long dismissed now lingered at the edges of thought, unbidden and persistent. He had been dispatched to the frontier world of Sycorax 9 to root out a suspected cell of heretical cultists, a mission that seemed straightforward on paper. Yet standing in the dim light of the cathedral manufactorum, amid the humming of the servitors and the rhythmic hiss of the purification burners, he realized that certainty had begun to slip. The reports did not match the reality he saw. The data slates bore inconsistencies he could no longer ignore, and the Vox Grill transmissions carried subtle contradictions that gnawed at the foundation of his judgment. For the first time in decades of service, Kale understood that being chosen by the Emperor did not inoculate one against error. He walked through the long, soot-darkened halls where Scutarii auxiliaries maintained the manufactorum's machinery, each servitor a silent witness to his faltering confidence. The scent of burnt promethium and scorched metal filled the air, mingling with the faint trace of incense intended to sanctify the work. Yet no prayer could cleanse the gnawing sensation that his mind had already betrayed him. Kale's fingers brushed the carved Imperial Aquila on the banister, worn smooth by centuries of clerical hands, and he felt the hollowness behind the icon. A symbol that had always inspired devotion now seemed an accusing eye. He realized, with a chill that ran down his spine, that failure is never announced by trumpets. It arrives in whispers, in the subtle withdrawal of trust, in the fleeting hesitation in the eyes of those who follow you. The first hint of suspicion came not from the Ordo Hereticus, not from whispered reprimands, but from the smallest deviation in his retinue. A junior acolyte hesitated before relaying a report, fingers tightening over the data slate, eyes flicking away in what he claimed was uncertainty. But Kale understood instinctively. The boy mirrored the unspoken fear that had begun to surround him. Authority, he realized, is sustained not by rank alone, but by the unbroken faith of those who serve. Once doubt takes root in the eyes of a subordinate, the rot begins to spread. He remembered the words of a mentor, long dead and exalted in liturgy. An Inquisitor is only as steadfast as those who trust him. Now, standing amid the hum of machinery and the faint hiss of flame, he felt the weight of his own faltering resolve like a physical burden pressing upon his shoulders. Kale retreated to a chamber lined with scrolls and codices, each one a testament to decisions made across centuries, decisions that had shaped entire worlds. The flickering light from the brazier cast elongated shadows across the walls, and in those shadows he began to perceive the specters of every failure the Imperium had never allowed to exist. Names struck from records, actions erased from chronicles, bodies buried where no records could betray the exact coordinates. All reminders that the cost of faltering was not merely death but erasure. The chamber itself seemed to lean closer, as though the architecture conspired with the Imperium to remind him, nothing survives here that the Emperor does not will. And in that silence, Kale felt the first true pang of fear, not for his life, but for his very existence within the web of Imperial memory. He tried to trace the origin of his doubt, seeking solace in doctrine and ritual, yet the rituals felt hollow, recited by lips that no longer echoed conviction but habit. The familiar liturgies, once a shield against uncertainty, now struck a discordant note, underscoring the fissure forming in his own resolve. The weight of responsibility pressed against his chest as tangibly as the iron gauntlets of a custodian guard, and he knew with stark clarity that the path forward demanded clarity he no longer possessed. Every decision felt like a potential herald of his undoing. Even the cathedral's vaults, where centuries of purified knowledge lay in meticulous order, offered no comfort. The very records seemed to whisper of his impending dissolution, of the subtle ways the Imperium corrects its own, removing what fails to shine. Cale understood, with a clarity that made his stomach turn, that the moment of doubt had arrived, and with it, the seed of downfall. No tribunal had yet judged him, no edict had yet been sealed, but he knew in his bones that the machinery of judgment had already begun to turn. In the Imperium, the fall of an Inquisitor does not begin with chains or confrontation. It begins in hesitation, in perception, in the tiny, imperceptible tremors that ripple through allies, enemies, and the machinery of faith alike. Cale's mind, once a precise instrument honed through decades of study, inquiry, and battle, now betrayed him with questions that could not be answered without risk. And as he looked across the chamber at the codices, their pages illuminated by flickering ember light, he saw not guidance but a mirror of his own faltering certainty. A single breath left his lips, ragged and shallow, as he whispered to no one, "Have I already failed?" The words seemed to echo, carried by the drafts of the hall, mingling with the hiss of promethium and the low murmur of distant machinery. And in that echo, he understood that failure need not yet strike to be felt. It was already present, tangible, a shadow cast long before any hand could decree it. The first fracture was done. The fall had begun. The day unfolded with the deceptive monotony of the manufactorum's operations. Cale moved through the cathedrals and corridors with the practiced steps of a man who had long mastered both ritual and protocol. Yet everywhere he looked, the whisper of erasure followed him. Doors that once opened without hesitation now required repeated commands. Servitors paused mid-task, their sensors scanning, analyzing, cataloging his deviations. Every mundane interaction became a test, every mechanical gesture a subtle judgment. He felt as if the very environment of the cathedral had turned against him, conspiring in concert with the unseen tribunal that would decide his fate. Even the muted light seemed sharpened, casting accusatory angles on faces and objects alike. By the evening, Cale found himself alone in the upper gallery, overlooking the manufactorum's labyrinthine floor below. Smoke from promethium burners coiled like serpents through the air, catching embers from distant fires, and the scene struck him with a surreal clarity. This was the galaxy the Emperor had entrusted him to safeguard, immense, ordered, yet governed by invisible forces he could neither control nor evade. And now, he realized, his authority existed only as long as others believed it should. The moment doubt enters the eyes of a servant, the machinery of the Imperium begins its inexorable judgment. Cale's own reflection in a polished brass panel showed not a figure of command, but a man already partially erased, his identity leaking through the cracks in perception. He whispered to the empty gallery, voice caught between defiance and despair, "Have I already failed?" The words carried on the smoke, on the machinery, on the silent witness of the servitors, and no answer returned. Only the quiet understanding that the first fracture was complete, and the fall had begun. Night returned like a predator, swallowing the cathedral's spires and cloisters in a darkness heavier than any absence of light. Darien Cale remained in the upper gallery, his robes pooling around him like shadows made solid, his mind a battlefield of questions that refused rest. Every sound became amplified, the hiss of a far-off promethium burner, the rhythmic ticking of cogitator clocks, the faint scrape of a servitor's jointed limb. Each was a reminder that nothing in the Imperium exists without observation, and that observation itself carries judgment. The instruments of his authority, once unquestioned, now functioned as both witness and jury. He realized that failure is never sudden. It begins as a quiet tremor that resonates through every corner of your domain, every mind that depends on you. A soft knock at the gallery door drew him from his reverie. Acolyte Soren returned, hesitant, carrying a data slate that flickered weakly with corrupted readings. "My lord," the boy murmured, "the lower catacombs, the structures shift. The walls themselves are alive, or at least moving as though they remember something." Cale's eyes narrowed, the words echoing not only a physical anomaly but a metaphor for his own state. The very ground beneath him, the structures of power he trusted, were not as solid as he had believed. The metaphor was cruelly precise. Even in the simplest statement, the Imperium's universe reminded him of fragility, of entropy creeping into human order, of the consequences awaiting those who hesitate when the machinery of judgment turns its gaze upon them. He followed Soren silently to the lower vaults, past corridors lined with centuries of archival records and the faint, ever-present odor of antiseptic oils. Every step amplified the weight on his shoulders. The vaults themselves seemed to anticipate his intrusion. Data slates flickered, servitors paused mid-motion, lights dimmed in irregular pulses. Cale understood that these were no mechanical failures, but subtle calibrations of the universe testing him, evaluating him, stripping away certainty with the precision of a scalpel. The instruments, the environment, the human agents, all conspired, not maliciously, but in perfect alignment with the imperatives of the Imperium. It does not forgive weakness. Deep in the vaults, Cale confronted the first true manifestation of his unsteady command. A locked door, previously unquestioned, refused to yield. The sigil of his office, worn and polished by centuries of use, offered no authority here. The mechanism required knowledge of rites and codes he had once memorized, yet now they faltered at the edges of memory. For a fleeting heartbeat, the cold certainty of failure overtook him. To the Imperium, this moment was already counted. Hesitation is as damning as guilt, and inability as destructive as treachery. The weight of this understanding pressed on him until his breath caught, chest tightening under the invisible hand of judgment. Cale's hand hovered over the unlocking glyphs, mind racing through the rituals and sequences drilled into him since his induction. He felt a dissonance between memory and execution, the creeping suspicion that some part of himself had been stripped even before any formal verdict. It was in this suspended state, caught between knowledge and doubt, that the Imperium's true cruelty revealed itself. There would be no parade of accusation, no final pronouncement of guilt. The machinery did not require spectacle. It needed only compliance or failure to comply. And in failing to instantly flawlessly align thought, action, and authority, Cale had already begun the long, silent unraveling. As he forced the mechanism to yield, the door groaning against centuries of disuse, he caught a glimpse of himself in the brass reflection, haggard and pale. The face staring back bore every mark of fatigue, every shadow of doubt amplified to grotesque proportions by candlelight and flickering flame. This was not the Inquisitor who had commanded fleets, interrogated heretics, or sanctioned the execution of traitors. This was the first fragment of the man already stripped away, the hollow shell that remained when the Imperium begins erasing its own. The lesson was simple and horrific. Failure need not be declared aloud. The universe itself, every loyal agent, every tool, every edifice, will announce it without mercy. Cale followed Soren silently to the lower vaults, words caught between past corridors lined with centuries of archival records. So this is how it begins, and the faint, the walls responded not with voice but with silence. The kind of oppressive silence that presses into bones and minds alike. The vaults themselves seemed to anticipate his first fracture was now absolute. Data slates flickered. The fall was no longer a possibility. Lights dimmed. It had begun, irreversible and inevitable. Cale understood that these were no mechanical failures, the galaxy, but subtle calibrations of the universe, and even the instruments of his own office had already started stripping away certainty with the precision. The final hours of night stretched. The instruments, the environment, the human agents, tight over the vast cathedral, not maliciously, but in perfect alignment through corridors that seemed narrower than before. It does not forget shadows elongated and almost sentient under the flickering confronted the first true manifestation. Every footfall echoed like an accusation. A locked door, every glance from a servitor or acolyte held the weight of silent judgment. The sigil of his office, he could feel the Imperium's machinery observing use, cataloged no authority here. Even the mechanism required knowledge of rights and codes counting failures memorized, who had once yet now they faltered at the edges of memory. Cale realized that the cost of faltering was not measured in punishment alone. Overtook him. It was a slow erasure. This moment invisibility imposed upon one's very hesitation is as damning as guilt, honor, and inability, identity, destructive as treachery. Silence. The weight of this understanding pressed on gray light till his breath through the high windows, chest tight, illuminating the invisible hand hung like suspended spirit. Cale's hand hovered over the found himself atop the central spire, mind racing, looking down over the manufacturums drilled into him since at a hive of activity that felt a dissonance between memory and execution. Every cog and gear part of the creeping suspicion that some part of himself had been stripped from this height even before any scope of the Imperium's indifference. It was in this suspended state, lives, missions, knowledge, and doubt, that the all intertwined in a lattice so vast that any single human, there would be no parade of accusation by the Emperor's no final pronouncement seemed inconsequential. The machinery, the weight of responsibility remained. It needed only compliance, or heavier than iron, pressing him to act, failing to against every flawlessly aligned thought, action, and authority. He remembered the faces of those had already begun the long, silent, trembling yet obedient, as he forced the mechanism senior acolytes who massed door groaning against centuries of disuse. He caught a glimpse of himself in the brass reflection, as if sensing the tremor in his resolve. The face staring back he every mark now was never inherent. Every shadow was a delicate resonance of grotesque proportions by candlelight, and once perception falters, this was not even a single mind commanded the collapse begins. Interrogated heretics. The thought was simple yet sanctioned the execution of the Imperium would not wait. This was the first fragment of the man already stripped away. It would act in accordance with the hollow shell that remained silently and unyielding, erasing its own. Whether he succeeded, the lesson was simple and horrific. Failure need not be declared aloud. The universe itself, every loyal agent, every tool, every edifice, will announce it without mercy. Cale turned to the cathedral's inner sanctum, where the statues of saints and venerated inquisitors stood vigil over centuries of history. Their faces, carved in soot-dark stone, were frozen in expressions of serenity, conviction, and silent judgment. He approached one, resting a gauntlet hand against the cold marble, and felt a shiver crawl along his spine. The stone was unyielding, yet it spoke. Even in triumph, the memory of failure persists. And Cale knew that his first tremor, the seed of doubt, had already taken root. The silent corridors, the observing machines, the very hierarchy of the Imperium, all bore witness to it. In that instant, he understood. The universe did not judge with fire or blade alone. It judged with perception, and he had already failed the test. Even as the manufactorum continued its ceaseless work below, Cale's mind spiraled, tracing every decision, every hesitation, every unspoken doubt. The machinery of the Imperium, so vast and precise, required only one imperfection to begin its quiet reckoning. He could see the threads of consequence weaving outward, missed signals, misinterpreted data, hesitant acolytes, all subtle, yet sufficient to unravel a life devoted entirely to service. He felt his own heartbeat as a metronome, counting down a sentence not yet pronounced, yet inescapable. He was both accused and jury, yet powerless to defend himself. As the first rays of the sun, pale, almost sterile, pierced the dust-choked air, Cale made a vow in silence, a private litany to an emperor who might or might not hear. He would either reclaim certainty or be erased by its absence. The moment of doubt had arrived, and with it, the stark knowledge that survival now demanded more than courage or intellect. It demanded an unwavering alignment with a system vast, impartial, and merciless. And in that knowledge, Cale stepped back from the edge of the spire, mind sharpened, body tense, prepared to confront the trial that awaited him, knowing that failure would come not with ceremony, but as a quiet, suffocating inevitability. The tremor within him had become a fracture, subtle but absolute. The machinery of judgment had begun its relentless march, and nothing could halt it. Not skill, not loyalty, not prayer. Darien Cale, once confident in the sanctity of his purpose, now faced the unthinkable truth. In the Imperium, doubt is more lethal than the enemy, more insidious than betrayal, and more inescapable than death itself. The first chapter of his fall had closed. The days blurred together, leaving only the heavy silence of like the cracks in an old wall. What the next day would demand. Each fissure a moment of doubt, each whisper a shadow of something much darker. The cathedral manse of the inquisitorial sanctum, once a beacon of unyielding authority, now felt like a tomb, the cold stone walls closing in around Cale with every passing hour. The ancient vaults, the cloisters of wisdom, and the vast, echoing halls that had once resonated with the footsteps of great inquisitors now felt like empty mausoleums, silently judging the hollow man who roamed within them. He no longer belonged to the cathedral. It had become a foreign land, an alien place that no longer acknowledged him. In the quiet moments when he wandered the hallways, his feet scuffing the dust of forgotten prayers, he began to notice the subtle changes. The torches on the walls flickered unnaturally, casting elongated shadows that seemed to stretch toward him, as though the stone itself was reaching out to claim him. In the distance, the faint hum of the servitor's movements was punctuated by the occasional static crackle from the Vox grill, a noise that seemed to be growing more frequent. These were the first signs that something was wrong, something that did not obey the logical, mechanical rhythms of the Imperium. It began subtly, like the moment before a storm. The whispers in the corridors were too quiet, too indistinct to understand, but Cale could feel them, a pressure in the air, a tightening around his chest, as though the very air itself had become oppressive. The statues of saints and warriors, normally silent and unmoving, began to look different. Their faces, which once held serene expressions of unwavering faith, now seemed to leer, twisted into grotesque mockeries of devotion. Eyes carved from cold marble now followed him in every direction. He knew it was a trick of his mind, but that did nothing to ease the growing sense of dread. It was the archivist who first spoke of the changes, her voice brittle with tension. "The codex, the records are altered, my lord." Her fingers trembled as she presented the data slate, the figures and symbols flickering as if alive. She was not the only one to notice the signs. Acolytes and agents spoke in hushed tones of missing files, of words that seemed to move of their own volition, and of strange discrepancies in the reports that came from the lower vaults. Some, the more superstitious among them, whispered that the vaults themselves were shifting, as though the very foundations of the sanctum had become sentient, aware. Cale, his mind already fraying from the weight of his failures, found himself drawn to the cryptic readings. The words were familiar, ancient rituals, sacred invocations, but something was wrong. They were incomplete, missing vital components, yet somehow they resonated with a dark and ominous energy. They beckoned him, their pull undeniable, like the gravitational pull of a dying star. His eyes lingered on them, transfixed by the rhythmic dance of symbols that seemed to shift before his gaze, never settling into anything recognizably human. The feeling was unshakable. The Imperium's vast machinery had slipped beyond his control. Something was shifting beneath him, and he could feel the dark currents pulling at the very structure of his being. That night, as he wandered the dimly lit halls of the sanctum, Cale thought he saw something fleeting, just at the edge of his vision. It was a figure, a shadow not quite human, with eyes that burned like coals. The figure appeared and vanished in an instant, but its presence lingered, leaving behind a coldness that seeped into his bones. The sound of the servitor's movements grew louder in his mind, as though they were coming closer, becoming more deliberate, more aware. Was it his imagination, or was the air itself growing thicker, more difficult to breathe? Cale's hand instinctively reached for the hilt of his sword, but it was not the presence of an enemy that haunted him. It was the very sanctity of the Imperium itself. The structure that had once been so firm, so certain, now felt as if it was breaking apart, piece by piece, like an ancient cathedral slowly crumbling under the weight of its own age. He could not tell if the cracks were in the stone or in himself, but the feeling was undeniable. The foundation was beginning to rot. He stood before a massive doorway, the threshold to the lower vaults, where the very heart of the Inquisition's secrets lay hidden. The door was massive, its iron bars covered in layers of dust and rust, and as Cale's fingers brushed against the cold surface, the air seemed to grow heavier still. The feeling was growing inside him, clawing at the edges of his mind. Something terrible was awakening within these walls, something that had remained dormant for millennia, but was now stirring. And Cale was at its center. The weight of his failure was no longer a personal matter. It was a cosmic inevitability. The Imperium itself had begun to shift, to tear itself apart, and he was the last to realize it. There was no turning back, no escape from the forces he had unwittingly unleashed. As the door creaked open, Cale stepped forward into the shadows, his every instinct telling him to turn back, to flee, but he could not. The pull was too strong. The air grew cold as Cale descended deeper into the sanctum's lower vaults. Each step echoed like a drumbeat, growing louder, more ominous, as though the very walls themselves were waking to his presence. The iron door behind him groaned and clanged shut with a finality that sent a shiver down his spine. The crypts below were far older than the cathedral manufactorum above, their origins lost to time, their design alien even by the standards of the Imperium. Faint greenish light seeped through cracks in the stone, casting sickly, uneven shadows that danced like living things, crawling along the floor and walls, reaching for him. The vaults themselves were a labyrinth, a series of twisting corridors and empty chambers that led nowhere and everywhere. The scent of mildew and old incense hung thick in the air, and the silence was oppressive, a tangible weight pressing down on him. For the first time, Cale felt small, insignificant, as though he were an intruder in a place where he did not belong. This was not the domain of men or inquisitors. It was something far older, older than the Imperium itself. As he moved deeper, he could hear something, a faint whisper, a voice low and guttural, as if spoken through a vox grill buried under layers of rust. It was unintelligible at first, a mere murmur in the darkness. But then, as he ventured further, it grew clearer. Words, ancient and forgotten, spoken in a language that Cale did not recognize. His hand clenched around the hilt of his weapon, the weight of it grounding him in reality, but his mind was elsewhere. These were no simple whispers. These were not the idle voices of the servitors or the acolytes lost in their duties. This was something alive. He rounded a corner, and before him stood a colossal door, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to writhe as he looked at them. They were not the sacred, holy sigils of the Imperium. These were twisted, incomprehensible glyphs, carved into the stone with an artistry that felt unnatural, as though they had been drawn by hands that had not known the warmth of flesh for eons. The air around the door shimmered with a strange energy, a crackling hum that vibrated through the ground, the walls, and into Cale's very bones. It was a feeling he had never known before, a palpable presence, something immense, something ancient. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He was not just in a crypt. He was standing at the threshold of something far more terrible. His breath came in shallow gasps as he stepped forward, the air thick with the scent of age, decay, and something else, something metallic, almost familiar. A sensation clawed at the back of his mind, a gnawing dread that would not relent. Every instinct screamed for him to turn back, to flee, but Cale could not. He was too deep, too far gone, and he knew, he felt, that he would never be allowed to leave. The door loomed before him, impossibly tall, its black surface swallowing the light around it, absorbing it until it seemed to disappear entirely. He reached out, trembling, and placed his hand against the door. The moment his skin made contact, the door shuddered, as though something within was awakening. A deep, resonant hum filled the chamber, vibrating the very air itself. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, and Cale felt a shiver run down his spine as he heard his name spoken in a voice that was not his own. Cale. The sound was like a tremor in the air, a pulse of power that struck at the core of his being. The word was an invitation, but not one he had asked for. It was a summons. The door before him groaned as the glyphs began to shift, rearranging themselves, forming new patterns as though alive. The hum intensified, and Cale felt his legs weaken, his will bending under the pressure of whatever force lay beyond. This was not the Imperium's design, not the orderly, calculated system that governed every aspect of human life. This was something else, something that had slumbered for eons, waiting for the right moment to awaken. He rounded a corner, the voice repeated, and before him stood a colossal door, more certain. Its surface etched with symbols. It was an order, a command to writhe as his mind screamed for him to resist. They were not the sacred, turn away, holy sigils of the Imperium. The pull of that voice was undeniable. These were twisted, incomprehensible. The door opened slowly, creaking carved into the stone with an artistry that felt unnatural, dimly lit chamber beyond, as though they had been drawn. The walls were lined with columns of dark stone, flesh for eons. Each one etched. The air around the door shimmered with a strange energy. A crackling in the center of the room vibrated. A massive statue loomed. The walls, its form into Cale's very bones. But was a feeling he had never known. The figure kneeling before, a palpable presence. The figure was clad in ancient armor, the same dark, realization hit him like a punch Cale had seen in the deepest recesses. He was not just in Imperium's most forbidden. He was standing at the threshold. The armor seemed to pulse with an unearthly energy. His breath came in shallow gasps as he stepped forward, yet it glowed faintly, thick with the scent of age, as though infused with a power that had not been seen. Something metallic, almost familiar. The figure's head was bowed. A sensation clawed at the back of his mind, a silent prayer, a gnawing dread that would not relent. Every instinct screamed for him. What he did know was that this figure was no mortal man. He was too deep, too far gone, and he knew this was something else. Felt that he would never be allowed to leave. A low, rumbling laugh echoed through the chamber, tall, reverberating black surface swallowing the light around. Cale's heart skipped a beat, absorbing as he felt the weight of the figure's gaze shift toward him. He reached out, though its eyes remained hidden, placed his shadow of its door. The statue behind it seemed to come to life. The door shuddered, its stone form cracking as though it too was awakening. A deep, resonant hum filled the chamber, his hand trembling vibrating brushed against the cold stone. The whispers grew louder, waiting, more distinct. And Cale knew that whatever lay beyond that run down his spine as he heard his name spoken in a voice that was not his own. He had just crossed the threshold. The sound was like a tremor in the air, a pulse of power that struck at the core of his being. The word was an invitation, but not one he had asked for. It was a summons. The door before him groaned as the glyphs began to shift, rearranging themselves, forming new patterns as though alive. The hum intensified, and Cale felt his legs weaken, his will bending under the pressure of whatever force lay beyond. This was not the Imperium's design, not the orderly, calculated system that governed every aspect of human life. This was something else, something that had slumbered for eons, waiting for the right moment to awaken.